just going to give you a second to get more folks over. Good morning, everybody. Ron Papsdorf again from DRCOG. I'll be starting off chairing the meeting, getting things going. Hopefully we'll have a chair and vice chair here shortly, and I'll be able to hand off the virtual gavel. Give us a couple of minutes while we get folks moved over from attendee to panelists so that before we formally convene the meeting, but just wanted to acknowledge that we're all here, and we'll get started in just a moment. Takes a beat or so to get people kind of transferred over to panelists. Looks like we have a critical mass or critical mass. Everybody ready? All right, thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'll call to order the April 1st, 2025 meeting of the Regional Building Decarbonization Technical Committee. Thank you for your participation today, and welcome to the meeting. Did we do roll call last time? We did intros. Robert, do you want to do roll call?
Yeah, I think we're going to have Cam do roll call just so
Okay.
it keeps it simple.
Cam, whenever you're ready, could you call the roll?
Okay, will do. And just a reminder, if I'm sending you a panelist request, please accept the panelist request. Thank you. So starting with Adams County, we have Amanda Perkins.
Present.
And we also, thank you. And we also have Melody Mascarenhas.
Mascarenhas. Thank you, Present.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Arapahoe County, we have Maurice Healy, and we have Justin Howe. Boulder County, we have Susie Strife and Jonathan Cohn. Broomfield is Garrett McDaniel. Denver, Elizabeth Babcock and Shannon Jane. Douglas County is Jonathan Nelson and John White. Gilpin County is Ray Rears. Jefferson County, Jeff Long. And Bridgeter Tomlin. For Southwest Weld County, we have Erica Thorley. Labor, we have Sergio Cordova. Affordable housing is Lucas Hagan. Nonprofit, LIDAC, is Brooke Pike. Building policy is Holly Harris. Nonprofit, Gabrielle Rink. Industry professional, Eric Wilson. Workforce development, LIDAC, Stephen Jackson. For industry, we have Sean Lemons. And then for utilities, we have Excel represented by Peter Johns. And then Longmont Power and Communications, we have Adam Sanderson. Thank you.
Thank you, Cam. Welcome, everybody. I do want to provide an opportunity for public comment. Any public comment to the committee. If you are attending, well, you should only be attending virtually. If there's anyone in the virtual audience that would like to provide public comment. Oh, sorry, excuse me. Please raise your virtual hand now. I don't see anyone on the phone, Cam, so we don't need any special directions there. If you're interested in providing public comment, please raise your hand now. All right, not seeing any, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is the acceptance of the March 4th, 2025 Regional Building Decarbonization Technical Committee meeting summary. That was attachment A in the agenda packet. Is there anyone that has any adjustments or revisions to the summary of the meeting? Hearing none, we'll let the summary stand as presented. All right, we have one action item today on the agenda and then a couple of discussion items around the Building Policy Collaborative and incentive program considerations. But before that, we'll move on to agenda item number 4, which is the election of a chair and vice chair, so that you no longer have to suffer through my mediocre chairing of this committee. Really happy to hand off the gavel to someone else. I will hand this item off to Robert Spots, who has been communicating to the committee about the members that are eligible to serve as either chair or vice chair and soliciting nominations. Robert will share information about the nominations we've received, and then we'll take nominations from the floor before taking action on that. So Robert Spots, take it away.
Thank you, Ron, and thank you all for letting me fill your inbox with requests. We only received one nomination for chair and one for vice chair. Susie Strife from Boulder was nominated by Liz Babcock, and Liz Babcock nominated herself for vice chair. So that is an option, but if anyone else here is interested in nominating someone else or self-nominating, please speak now. Eric.
That was an accident.
No worries.
That was April Fool's, right, Eric?
Yeah.
Going once on other nominations. Twice. With that, Ron, I would entertain a motion.
Yeah, thank you. I think with one nominee for chair and one nominee for vice chair, if it's okay with the committee, I'd like to move acceptance of those appointments to chair and vice chair by acclamation. So if all members of the committee could just unmute themselves and say aye, that would be appreciated.
Aye.
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 Hi.
Aye.
All right, I am more than happy to now, as my last official duty as your interim chair, to hand the gavel to your new chair of the Building Decarbonization Technical Committee.
Thank you.
Thank you for stepping up, Susie.
Oh, absolutely. It's an honor. It's wonderful to be here with all of you, and I appreciate it, Liz. Thanks. I hope it will be seamless and efficient for you all. I think we'll move on to the discussion items. Agenda item number 5, Building Policy Collaborative Jurisdictional Support Grant Program. What a title. And I believe that's you, Greg.
Yep, thank you, Susie. Hi, everyone. Great to see you all again today. Really eager and happy to talk to you all a little bit about the jurisdictional support grant proposal that we're bringing before you. So I'm just going to take a minute to try to share my screen and make sure that that works for everyone. All right. How are we all doing? We see my slides? Great. So yeah, as I said, my name is Greg Meow. I'm the program manager for the Building Policy Collaborative, and we're going to talk a little bit about the money that's going out to the jurisdictions today and what our proposal is around that. Before I do, I just want to sort of remind us all, since it's been a little bit, of what we're trying to address through my aspect of the Decarbonize DRCOG program. So we have a problem of inconsistent patchwork of local building codes, regulations, and processes. There's lots of costs and challenges for local governments in developing, adopting, implementing, and enforcing new building codes and decarbonization policies. And there's a lot of uncertainty about sort of where we what can we do, where are we going. This is definitely from a policy and regulatory perspective. We're starting to enter into some more novel and ambitious areas, and we're definitely starting to butt up against some legal challenges around EPCA and other issues that we need to navigate together. And so what is our solution to this problem? Well, I can't fix EPCA preemption for everyone, unfortunately, but we are going to be providing through this program both DRCOG and peer support to our localities and local jurisdictions for consistent policy adoption and implementation. We'll be providing financial support to those jurisdictions to incentivize them to adopt those and implement, building decarbonization policies and support them, throughout, their implementation. And then, we'll have some research budget to help answer questions that come up along the way, as it relates to, impacts on the electrical grid and our capacity to do this, and, addressing some of those legal challenges, as I mentioned. And really, we'll be using those three strategies through this program, with the goals of driving energy efficiency and climate pollution reduction through the, effective implementation of our ambitious building policies, and developing collaborative solutions together. So really working together to help, address some of that patchwork that I mentioned earlier. And together, we hope to lower the long-term energy cost burden for building owners and occupants, and with other aspects of our Decarbonized DRCOG program, really transform the Metro Denver market, utilizing this regulatory arm, but also the incentives in the incentives program that Mac's running, and the workforce development program that Clay's running, and the marketing and communications work that Chris is running. So my program, the Building Policy Collaborative, really consists of 3 sub-programs. The Jurisdictional Support Program, which is the vast majority of the funds that we have dedicated. That's $34.8 million in sub-awards over the course of the grant to DRCOG member governments, really with the intent of supporting direct staff capacity and other systems for policy implementation, building decarbonization policy implementation. We have $2.5 million that we've set aside to help facilitate peer conversations through a community of practice and a cohort. We are currently contracting with our selected vendor for that, and that is Lotus Sustainability and Engineering. They have experience running the existing codes cohort that some of you all may be participating in, and we'll be creating space to workshop the challenges that we're running into, to develop that sort of consistent policy platform that we're working towards, and really have space for buildings folks to talk to buildings folks, and have our sustainability folks talking to each other, and finding support as we move down the policy process together. And finally, as I mentioned, we have that $1 million budget for localized research to respond to questions that come up along the way. So we're really here to talk about today that first aspect of my program, which is the Jurisdictional Support Program. As I mentioned, this is $34.8 million in subawards to member governments, really with the goal of, sorry, I just said that averages out to roughly about $600,000 if distributed equally to all member jurisdictions if everyone took it over the course of 4 years. And this is really to support local policy implementation. But what do we mean by policy implementation? Well, really, this is meant to help local governments implement, enforce, and collaborate on specific policies such as updated energy codes, building performance emissions and equipment standards, licensing requirements, permitting processes, and other policies that we'll be workshopping together through the community of practice. It also means supporting direct staff capacity and other sort of infrastructure necessary to be able to implement and operationalize these policies. And our goal with this program is to make sure that we're getting this money to our jurisdictions as soon as possible so that they can start utilizing it and drawing it down, and they can bring that capacity on board, and really trying to prioritize, making this sort of as expeditious of a process as possible. Before I jump into the specifics of our actual policy proposal, though, I want to just sort of share a little bit about the history of what's gone on in terms of how we've been developing this proposal. So much as with the overall sort of development of the Decarbonized DRCOG grant application, this has really been a local staff-led initiative, and they've been really, we've had a rock star group of local staff from many of our the jurisdictions that you all represent that had started out working with Robert and Maddie here to host a number of workshops, the building policy collaborative workshops that started in November of last year. And it's really been an iterative process to help sort of narrow down what the structure of this program looks like. And I want to sort of just emphasize that this really has been a process that's done been responsive to local feedback. So we hosted one back in November, sort of just talking about the overall goals of what we want to accomplish through our the building policy collaborative as a whole, sort of the challenges that we see to achieving those outcomes, identifying sort of what is necessary, the gaps that we need to fill in order for local governments to be able to actually, achieve the outcomes that we've identified in terms of our greenhouse gas reductions, and then, starting to narrow in on that role of what role the building policy collaborative can play in supporting our local jurisdictions. And through that workshop, the group really expressed interest in exploring, the following policies, including building codes, performance standards, equipment standards, and emission standards. And so that's really where we're going to be focused on. And those are really the policies that we're hoping people will be implementing and that these dollars will be supporting the implementation of. That workshop also helped identify some of the specific roles that we're trying to fill with regards to the way this program is set up, helping, again, sort of support that staff capacity, build and demonstrate community alignment, provide a space for discussing legal questions and, addressing the risks associated with policy adoption and implementation, encouraging sort of a consistent manner of community engagement with priority populations, aligning around consistent trainings and standards for our region, and helping them address some of those research questions that come up that are shared between all of our jurisdictions. We then held a second workshop in December 9th, focusing then in on sort of what are the eligible uses for the jurisdictional awards. If we're giving all this money to local jurisdictions, what are the strings we're attaching to it? How are we directing jurisdictions to utilize this funding? And then began sort of talking with our jurisdictions about what barriers they might be experience or face in applying for and utilizing that funding to make sure that we can actually make this available to as many jurisdictions as possible and figure out ways to design our program to reduce the administrative burden as much as possible. This informed the development of our first draft proposal that was workshopped with participating jurisdictions on January 13th. I'm going to do a special call out to Mara Owen of North Glen, who really led the development of this proposal. It's a great proposal. It included a number of different options for what the program might look like. Discussing sort of what are the, defining those eligible uses, getting feedback on whether we're missing anything that jurisdictions wanted to use this funding for, and really then starting that big discussion around what's the funding allocation going to be? How are we distributing this money in what we consider to be an inequitable manner across our region, and in a manner that really is incentivizing and addressing the sort of the goals of our CPRG grant rate of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. So that's where, we were, as I said, we've been soliciting lots of local feedback throughout this process. And really, the primary feedback that we got from that workshop was to really try to pursue a, 2-round method for fund distribution. The first round sort of being along the lines of a formula funding, and then following up, depending on who we have and who does not choose to participate in that first round, having a second round of competitive grants to distribute the remainder of the dollars that have been pre-allocated as we go forward. And, That's also where we got the feedback on sort of defining the primary areas of the eligible uses that we've included in the upcoming proposal. All right. So that's enough background. Let's get into the actual proposal. I'm going to run through sort of the three major aspects, sort of eligible uses, the funding distribution, and then sort of the like grant logistics individually. And I'm going to pause after each one to allow for feedback, since I think it'll be easier to sort of have more focused discussions relative to each of those issues. So first, so this is our jurisdictional support grant proposal 2.0. First, who can apply? Well, this is going to be open to any DRCOG jurisdiction or partnership amongst more than one DRCOG jurisdiction. And we are encouraging particularly the smaller jurisdictions to consider partnerships in their applications. And we've really been thinking through some of the different ways that we might be able to support, some of those jurisdictions that are receiving smaller dollar amounts to pool their resources in a manner that really helps support implementation in their jurisdictions. So we have explored and we are exploring options around not just sort of pooled applications, but also figuring out if we can create sort of a preferred vendor list or some other form of pre-vetted contract that may be administered by DRCOG that local jurisdictions could use and tap into. Second, what are the requirements for applying? Trying to keep it, again, very simple. Only two requirements. One, you must participate in our peer network. So in order to qualify for this money, you must join into the Building Policy Collaborative and attend, a minimum of 75% of those meetings. We know that policy, really, it's a long process and it can be hard, and we really want to make sure that people are getting the support that they need in order to pursue those policies and finding, innovative ways and workshopping together, all of their challenges, innovative ways to address their challenges that are popping up. The other aspect, the other requirement that we're looking into right now, and this is updated relative to this slide. The slide was finalized 2 weeks ago, and we've had subsequent discussions, but we are looking for a letter of commitment from a senior elected official and or potentially city, senior administrative official for each jurisdiction that comes with the grant application. We want to make sure that that the city, our jurisdictions are committed to the overall purposes of the grant. And we think that that's a really strong and important aspect of signaling sort of that level of commitment. But we're very open to hearing all your feedback on that as well. So let's get into the eligible uses, and then I'm going to pause for discussion. So what can the money be used for? Well, in response to sort of all of the workshops that we've had, we've tried to narrow the categories to the following 6 eligible uses. It's really 5 with an innovation kind of use at the end. But the primary way that we're trying to direct and encourage our communities to utilize this money is for staff capacity. We know there are jurisdictions that have limited staff in the sustainability field or limited expertise in their building departments and navigating their energy codes, and we want to make sure that we're supporting jurisdictions in building up that capacity and expertise to be able to operationalize their programs in an effective manner. So that includes internal or pooled staff capacity, if that's something that jurisdictions are interested in. Whether that's internal, and that can be contracted. We know a number of our jurisdictions, especially the small ones, are on contract building departments. And, we've had some initial conversations with groups like Safe Built and others about, bringing on capacity to do, more robust energy code development and enforcement. And in terms of what that looks like, that means staff salaries and or, contracting expenses. The primary limitation we're trying to put on this is to, make sure that we're doing our due diligence and, covering our bases so that if we do get audited by EPA, we know that this is contributing to new staff for a new purpose for the purposes of the grant. So we will be, putting in some reporting measures related to this to make sure that we're not, supplanting existing staff, maybe supplementing, if we're doing expanded staff capacity, if you have like a half FTE and you're going to bring them onto a full FTE and you want to budget that way, we will work with our jurisdictions to figure out how to best to do that reporting and fill out that application. But that's really the big limitation that we have with regards to staff capacity. The rest of the uses are, are eligible uses. We're hoping and trying to encourage our jurisdictions not to make these the sole thing that they apply for when they submit their applications. But, in response to some of the needs that were identified through those workshops, we want to be able to make sure that jurisdictions can utilize these funds for, internal inspector training or training for elected officials on, on specifically, the building decarbonization policies and codes, as well as other certifications, such as, LEED certifications and or, some of the other energy and emissions codes and standards certs out there that may be beneficial to local staff. The third eligible use that we are going to be allowing for, or we're proposing to allow for, is for permitting and system support. In particular, we know that there are sort of technological and software licenses that people will need to procure and utilize as they're administering these programs, particularly as we go into some of the existing buildings space that there are going to be more sort of measurements that we're going to be making and requirements, reporting requirements that we're going to have from all the existing building owners. So we want to make sure that localities have the ability to integrate, all of that policy implementation and administration into their grant application and budget for that accordingly. Especially since, if you're migrating to new, codes, new enforcement software, like there's a whole process that can go into that. So we want to make sure we're supporting localities as they, address sort of how they're permitting, projects and then, administering and enforcing their programs. The fourth eligible use is then for sort of technical assistance for more one-off projects to support, policy development, to support, inspection enforcement program and, planning to sort of help, think through what enterprise rollout might look like for a jurisdiction, to come out with that rollout plan and that implementation plan. And for, again, some of those other uses that we have identified in terms of scouting out some of the challenges that people might be feeling or worried about with regards to, legal constraints or other things. And finally, the final two eligible uses are for community engagement to help sort of coordinate jurisdiction-led community engagement. We have a full community engagement program here through the Decarbonized DRCOG program that is for our entire region, and you'll learn more about that from Chris later in terms of how that's structured. So there are some boundaries we're going to be trying to draw between sort of what's going on in that program, but we do know that localities have their own, stakeholding that they need to do as they're developing their policies, as they're, running them up the chain, building that community support for adoption at the, by elected officials. And then finally, we do have sort of our catch-all eligible use, which is sort of our innovation proposal. Give us your best, proposal that's not in here, as long as it's consistent with the overall goals of our CPRG grant and of the Building Policy Collaborative. That is, as long as this custom measure supports, building policy implementation and reduces emissions, we're committed to working with our local jurisdictions to sort of narrow down, what that proposal looks like and make sure that it's, budget it out and make sure that it's approved. So I am going to note, sort of as I said, with regards to community engagement, there is money out there in the ecosystem that overlaps with some of these uses. So and that we need to clarify in terms of what's available, what's out there, what are we funding versus what's the energy office funding, and how should that inform local jurisdictions. So I am coordinating with the other program managers here at DRCOG to sort of make sure that we're developing a slide deck that we can distribute to all of our jurisdictions to sort of clarify what are all the different funding streams that we have, what's going to, if a local jurisdiction wants to do workforce development, Play has money for workforce development and is leading a DRCOG-led effort there. So we want to make sure we're not, double funding initiatives or directing sort of our resources the right way. So we'll be doing that. And then we're also in close communication with the energy office and with Russ and Carlos over there and Adam over there to sort of align our opportunity and our funding opportunity with their CPRG grant and the local government policy accelerator that they're running, which they are really, we're trying to make all of our jurisdictions aware of sort of all of those different funding opportunities. I think they're planning on opening their grant around the same time we're planning on opening ours. So we're hoping that we can get enough information out there to all of our jurisdictions ahead of time so that they can plan for how they want to try to access all these different funding streams in a coordinated manner. All right. Just to share also, we are developing supports for jurisdictions in a grant application package. So we are in the process of developing detailed examples for all of those eligible uses of what it might actually tangibly look like, to what an application might look like for those uses, as well as some template budgets. This is just an example of a potential staff capacity budget for a fully loaded salary over the course of 4 years, and sort of how we're thinking of what a local budget proposal might look like. And here's just sort of another example of more of a project-based budget for, for example, of a code update. So just some final notes, and then I'll pause for feedback. The grant is designed so that local jurisdictions can apply for multiple eligible uses up to their total awarded amount. So when we're doing, we'll get into the what the actual funding distribution looks like later, but we've just essentially designed the formula right now, or proposing a formula that puts people into tiers, and you can get budget up to $50,000 or up to $2 million, depending on the size of your jurisdiction and those criteria. And we are allowing applicants to apply for multiple eligible uses up to their maximum award amount over that 4-year period. We are, as I said, developing sample application blueprints to try to help make sort of these some plug and play options, particularly around some of the simpler eligible uses like staff capacity. That'll help us process the applications a lot faster and be able to start contracting with our local jurisdictions faster. And I've been meeting with our contracts team to make sure that we are getting as much clarity as possible prior to the grant application going out about what the reporting, meeting, and invoicing requirements are and how those are going to differ between the different eligible uses. So we are in the process of developing a full, we actually have a full draft package. If we just didn't want to sort of inundate you with all too much in advance. But I'm sure that we will be finalizing that and sharing that with you all in advance of our next meeting. But we are trying to make sure that we have as detailed and robust of a grant application package as possible to help make application actually applying for this money as easy as possible. So I am gonna, I said I was gonna pause. Just gonna say we have gotten in at our March 17th meeting, we did get feedback on, you know, where people are, you know, if there's been any development in terms of eligible uses. It seems to be pretty consistent with our prior meetings, as well as trying to identify interest in collaborative applications. And so just to say, there was a lot of interest expressed there and sort of concern or empathy shared towards the smaller jurisdictions that may have higher administrative burdens. And so a lot of interest in making sure that we can support collaborative applications. So now I'm going to pause and I would be happy to take any questions from anyone. I see, I guess I'll facilitate this. I saw Melody first, then Susie, then Martin. I'm going to go in that order.
Hi. I guess I just had a question because at the same time this effort's going on is also this building policy collaborative, the building codes, and a grant for that. So these are separate tracks, right? Because we have this decarb committee going on in this effort, and then this building policy. I'm new to the city here and just trying to make sure we're looking at everything that's available to us in Commerce City, Adams County.
So and we're in the process of, we know there's a lot of confusion in the jurisdictions about sort of what are all the opportunities out there. And we've definitely heard the need to make sure that everyone knows about sort of everything that's existing in the ecosystem. So the way that I'm thinking about it and trying to explain it to folks is we basically have sort of two large buckets of money. There's the DRCOG grant that has a bunch of sub programs, and we're I can discuss. And then there's the CEO CPRG grant as well, and the local government policy accelerator that Russ and Carlos are running. So those are the two organizations that have money out there. And the one that's probably the most ripe for confusion is that CEO's local government policy accelerator does allow applications for building policy adoption. They have other eligible uses as well. So we are going to be creating a 2-pager to try to clarify sort of what the distinction is between their money and our money, because our biggest concern, particularly for EPA reporting requirements, is that we're not both funding the same thing. In the DRCOG space, there are a number of grants that are going to be going out there to different organizations. The only one that's really going intended and directed towards local governments is the grant that I am running, which is what we're calling the Jurisdictional Support Grant. That is part of my overall program, which is the Building Policy Collaborative. And as part of that, so we'll be administering this grant, and then the sort of the companion part of that is the Building Policy Collaborative / peer network. That's not going to have grant money attached to it. That is a portion of our project that is funding the facilitator to bring all of our communities together to run monthly workshops on policy development, policy adoption, workshopping that. They do have, in that contract, there is capacity set aside for assisting local governments as they, develop slide decks for policy adoption and implementation and things of that nature. So there's technical assistance available to jurisdictions kind of through their participation in that, but that is a separate, that's not money that's going to be directly administered to local governments. That'll be something that's administered through their participation with that facilitator. So hopefully that provides a little bit of clarity. If not, I can just let you know that I'm already actually working on that slide of just, for the visual learners out there, literally mapping out all the different funding opportunities and sort of what their timelines are and what they're intended to fund.
Thank you. That would be helpful because I am visual and I'm just trying to track things and I'm having difficulty with all that. So there seems to me sometimes overlap. So it'd be nice to have those on separate tracks. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Susie, we'll do you next and then Martin.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. This is awesome. And I just want to underscore this policy piece is so important and vital for our major emission reductions. So I just really appreciate the thought. And I keep hearing from at least our team that this, the work that you've been doing has been really collaborative and awesome. My question is about, given the jurisdictions are having sort of similar issues in terms of staff capacity, and that's come up quite a bit. Have you all, in terms of getting your resources to go farther, thought about fractional services in terms of a building policy code specialist that can kind of dance between different communities and maybe two? In other words, you all host them and then they provide that policy expertise to multiple communities at once. I just throwing it out there to see if that's been entertained at all.
So we've definitely talked about that, and it's come up in terms of trying to help jurisdictions. We've talked about it a little bit more amongst sort of whether it be hosted by a host community. So there have definitely been discussions about whether that's a service that would be ripe for our county applicants to be able to sort of structure and apply for, since that's sort of a service model that they frequently employ for local jurisdictions. So we're in the we haven't defined it fully yet, but we're certainly would encourage local jurisdictions that don't necessarily, when they do see their total allotment, if they don't think it's enough to fully bring on a staff or to start discussions with their counties and or potentially other, larger jurisdictions that might be willing to do sort of a contract employment opportunity around that. We have explored, we've also talked about that for our contract building departments out, there are jurisdictions that are on contract building departments to make sure that, those organizations providing those services have bring on the capacity to be able to do sort of, on-call support as, if you're in Idaho Springs, like a new building proposal comes in, right? It's, not necessarily a thing that you're going to want to or need a full-time employee on, but to be able to manage sort of code enforcement as it relates to that. I don't know that we've talked about hiring or hosting, sort of like being the contract employer ourselves at DRCOG. I think we could talk about it, but there's that hasn't been a point of consideration at this point.
Thanks, Greg.
All right, Martin, I'll go to you.
Thank you, Greg. I have a two-part question. First of all, in regard to the $1 million research component and the $2.5 million facilitation of peer conversations and policy consistency and a couple of other things you mentioned, when do you expect that more clarity will be available regarding what is planned for those aspects of funding? And will the participating communities have the opportunity to participate in directing what we would like them to do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question, Martin. So I will go into the timeline for this program at the end, but but all these things are sort of rolling at the same time in parallel. So the goal is to finalize our contract with our facilitator ASAP, and really have them begin their direct outreach to the local jurisdictions this month, with the goal of launching. So if we're hoping to launch the grant opportunity in June of this year, we're also hoping to get the first facilitated sort of kickoff meeting with all participating jurisdictions. Also, similarly in that June, maybe July period for the facilitated network. That is something that I'm currently, we have a jurisdictional support working group, sort of the group that helped define and lead these workshops has also been chiming in on what the shape of that cohort's going to look like. We are in that process. Our facilitators recommended developing a steering committee for all, peer network activities, which would help sort of design, help provide guidance on what the curriculum and that sort of the cadence of meetings looks like, and the, what are the topics of discussion? How are we dividing out the affinity groups that might exist within that overall effort? We know that that effort encompasses jurisdictions that have very ambitious policies already in place to jurisdictions that, maybe, starting new as it relates to sort of learning about these policies. So we know that there's going to be there's a lot of design considerations for how we want to administer and operate that group. We're kind of having those conversations now. As soon as the contract's done, for one of the first items is to get that steering committee sort of enrolled as we're starting that outreach. And just because we're going to have a kickoff meeting in June doesn't mean that the whole program's going to be designed by June. I think, we're hoping to use that, do some level setting about sort of what has the existing codes cohort done, where are we going as a group, what are our overall goals as a group. So we'll have a kickoff meeting, and then there'll probably be a couple months, the first couple months of, figuring out how is that thing, how is that peer network going to work, what are our collective goals, and sort of building that buy-in. And so I do think there'll be an opportunity for our jurisdictions to provide feedback, say, hey, I really want to be talking to, my neighbor city because we do a lot of things together, or hey, I really want to be talking to, other cities of similar sizes because, we think they face similar challenges to us. So we're going to be using some of that space to try to suss out exactly what the affinity groups look like and how, and then, our goal is to have regular meetings with everyone, kind of quarterly maybe, and then create these affinity groups where everyone can kind of workshop, with whoever they kind of self-identify as peers, or, whether it's on, by subject matter, because we're all working on performance standards, or if it's on, by size, or, based on challenge. So still some things to be defined there. As it relates to the research budget, we're in the process of developing an RFQ. We've got some research questions that have been bubbled up consistently throughout a number of our jurisdictions in the existing Metro codes cohort that we know that we need to address, both in turn and that we need to address for our overall, for all of our jurisdictions, but also for our overall program, right? In terms of our marketing and how we talk about this. So we're in the process of utilizing that, those initial questions to sort of issue an RFQ so that we can identify vendors that are well situated and suited to answering the different questions that are coming up. Some of these are going to be more oriented towards engineering firms. Some might be, there's some legal questions that, will, a different vendor might want to respond to. So we'll probably issue that RFQ, and then that, we're also in the process of conducting a lit review just to make sure that we're not, going to contract on something that's generally speaking already been answered to a sufficient degree for our purposes. So I imagine come this summer, once that lit review is done, and we've issued that RFQ, we'll be able to have a lot more scoping calls with our, with the vendors that we've talked to about sort of the research, narrowing those research questions. And then the goal is to make sure that, we have budget. If we need to do an RFP for a major research item, we can do that. But that way we will pre-qualified some vendors for some smaller research questions. And our goal is to definitely save a good chunk of that money for being able to respond to questions that come up through that peer network, right? As, some of the jurisdictions start piloting new policies, what are the questions that they know that they need answered. So we're going to be reserving some of that money throughout the course of our overall grant to be able to do that kind of responsive research.
Excellent, thank you. Just one quick follow-up item, if you don't mind. In regard to eligible expenses, just from some internal meetings, the thoughts go quickly toward, well, we could just use the amount that we have to put solar panels on something, right? And and my response is, well, that's not really the intent, and kind of go over the, what is eligible again. But what I'm suggesting is that in addition to listing what's eligible, it might be also advisable to list what isn't eligible.
That's a great idea, Martin. I appreciate that, and I'm sure that would help all of you translate for your peers as well in terms of sort of defining the boundaries on sort of what this money can be used for. So I appreciate that comment. Yes, there's other money out there for direct infrastructure, but our grant in general is not solar anyways, so we can help sort of define some of that. Right. Susie, I saw you came off. Is there anything else you wanted to add, or are you just trying to move us on?
Nope, I'm just being, yeah, facilitating the next step. If we all don't have any other questions for Greg. I'm not seeing any other hands. Thank you so much. That was an awesome presentation.
Oh, so actually, I have
Go
more.
ahead. Go ahead.
All right, let's keep going. Let's talk about the money because that's probably what everyone's most interested in. Um, so, um, so the proposal really before you and what we wanted to discuss is what the funding formula looks like, and to get your buy-in and support for how we are recommending that we distribute the money amongst our jurisdictions. So our goal with the first round of funding is to essentially allocate the entirety of the jurisdictional support awards in this first round. We understand that not everyone will take it, and some jurisdictions may not take their full potential allotment. So our goal is to try to front load this, especially because of our reimbursement grant, so that we can get the money, we can award as much money as possible in this first round, get that capacity onboarded as soon as possible, and then figure out what to do with the rest of the money through our competitive grant process at the second round. So we are recommending 2 rounds of funding. The first will happen this summer with a goal of really contracting and getting that money, finalizing our contracts with our jurisdictions no later than the fall of this year, maybe October at the end date, with the second round sort of running and then in spring of 2026. We have considered potentially, if needed, a third round later, depending on sort of how the money, plays out and getting distributed. The formula that we're recommending the distribution that we're recommending is tiered based. So we have developed a formula, which you can see here, that then we've sort of batched and bunched people into, or jurisdictions into, one of those 8 funding tiers. So the funding tiers, which are on the next page, I'll show you really quickly, sort of indicate the maximum award available to a jurisdiction that scores in that tier. So for the first tier, that's $0 to $50,000. For the last tier, that's the $1.5 million to $2 million. So the tiers are, the number indicated there is the maximum award amount possible based on tier. So the recommendation in terms of how we've developed the formula and scored all of the jurisdictions is really based on the criteria that went into the development of our CPRG grant in the first place. So it's based on the statistics and projections maintained by DRCOG about where our greenhouse gas emissions are coming from and are going to come from. So population is used as a correlate for residential building stock, and jobs as a correlate for commercial real estate. The relative weighting of population to jobs is based on the greenhouse gas inventory that was conducted as part of our CPRG grant, where 22% of the emissions come from residential buildings and 30% come from commercial. So we are weighting commercial space more than residential space, particularly for existing buildings. We are also recommending a weight of, where we're weighting the current population and jobs, representing 75% of the total score that a jurisdiction gets. So we are really prioritizing, in many ways, existing building stock as representing you know, jurisdictions in their scoring criteria, with the remaining 25% of that weight really being allocated again towards future projections of residential and commercial growth. So those are really the four criteria: existing population, existing jobs, projected future population growth, and projected future job growth. We did go through a number of different exercises, and there were many, many, many spreadsheets out there where we tried to consider other weighted criteria that people had recommended, including both trying to find the right metrics for figuring out what local jurisdiction greenhouse gas emissions are and or will be, what the environmental justice or the equity impacts, are within our jurisdictions, as well as some of the, would we want to per se incentivize, jurisdictions that are on older codes to update to newer codes. We are not including any of those weights in this current proposal for a number of reasons, primarily particularly for greenhouse gas emissions and the sort of equity impacts. Our data metrics, our data sources are pretty rough and poor and inconsistent across the region for emissions. And then for scores, for the equity impacts, a lot of that, even at census block data level, is very inconsistent with our jurisdictional boundaries. So, when we think about distributing money to a jurisdiction like Lakeside, its census block group is actually bigger than Lakeside and dips into a lot of Denver. So it's really hard to figure out exactly the right way to, include those criteria. Similarly, for existing code adoption flags, we tried not to, they ended up turning into basically a baseline subsidy for being on old codes. So they were taking a lot of jurisdictions that didn't have updated codes and sort of guaranteeing them a minimum distribution. That didn't really seem consistent with sort of the overall size of those jurisdictions, as well as sort of their contributions to our overall regional greenhouse gas emissions. So those are some of the criteria. We did try to explore those, but ultimately, given sort of the goal of our grant, which is greenhouse gas reductions, and sort of the inventory that was done in support of our CPRG grant, we really thought the most corollary criteria for the funding formula were, existing jobs and population, prioritizing again our existing building stock, because that's where most of our emissions are coming from right now, and then but including sort of growth projections as well. I'm sure we'll have questions, but I'm going to move on. So here's the funding tiers. As I said, there's 8 funding tiers. We did a bunching exercise to make sure that no jurisdiction, by score was going to end up like, if the score, was, for example, here, no one's a 24, right? The range is 15 to 24, but nobody is on the threshold of being able to jump into the next funding tier. So we really did that sort of exercise to make sure that, everyone who's in a tier is pretty solidly in their tier and is receiving money that is actionable, right? So the other thing that we did here is we tried to set the award amounts that we're recommending of 50,000, 100, 300, 600 as increments of essentially staff capacity. So our built-in assumption is that for 4 years, it would cost roughly $600,000 to hire a loaded staffer. We've tried to create the award tier amounts relative to that, so that when people go to try to pool their resources, they can sort of easily work together to pool up to either half FTE or a full FTE. And we really did try to maximize how many people would end up being able to bring on a full staffer. So this is just an example in the attachment that you saw in the agenda. All the way at the very, very bottom of the agenda items, there is a full 3-page funding list for every DRCOG jurisdiction. So this is just a sample representative so that I could meet the the accessibility requirements of font size. But here you can see basically the jurisdiction, the relative score per jurisdiction, and what tier that puts a jurisdiction in for their overall award amount. So just to kind of show you where those breaks are and where how big the tiers are, and to sort of give you an idea to kind of gut check, are communities that you think should be together or in similar tiers, together. But I encourage you, as you're looking through this proposal overall, to really go to that full spreadsheet. It is organized by tiers, from low to high, I believe. And you can see sort of all the numbers of, the total number of jurisdictions per tier, as well as everyone's score based on what their existing population is, existing jobs, and then their projections moving forward. So just to sort of wrap up on the funding allocation proposal, we are planning on having that second round to be able to have a distributive mechanism for any leftover funds in case some of our jurisdictions don't apply. And then we haven't fully developed what the criteria for the second round will be, but we are trying to essentially make a highly weighted criteria that if you did not participate in the first round, you will be eligible to receive funds in the second round. We know that some of our jurisdictions may not, they just may not be able to get in the first round, and we don't want to overly penalize them for not being able to do so. Some of the other criteria that we're considering then are sort of further innovation and impact projects, and whether or not those things, the proposals could be replicable across the region. Before I open this up for conversation, I just want to say we did run this through the March 17th workshop, which had pretty good participation. I think we had roughly 30 folks there, and generally speaking, participants are from planet, sustainability offices and building departments, but we just wanted to gut check sort of overall local jurisdiction comfort level with our proposal in terms of how we're going to be distributing the funds. And we're very gratified to hear that so far people seem to be pretty comfortable with how we're proposing to do this distribution. So I'll turn it over to you, Susie, to help facilitate us.
Okay. All right. Any further questions for Greg? Thank you again for this awesome presentation. Okay. Barring any questions, we'll move on to discussion item number 6, incentive program considerations with Mac. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks so much. I did see one hand go up, Susie.
Oh, I didn't see it. Okay. Thank you very much. Whose hand?
Maybe not. I'm going to go ahead and get my screen set up. If somebody did have a hand up, you can go ahead and.
Actually, I think, Greg, you needed to wrap up there, right? You had one last section.
Yes, I have, let's see, a total of 3 more slides, 2 more slides that I think are important. If I could just very quickly do it, and then I see as Jonathan's hands up. So let me just share my screen again real quick, or are you still seeing it? No, let me share screen. All right, so the last thing I just wanted to preview for folks is what the timeline for the grant is going to be and what we'll be coming to you all for. Our goal is, and what we've heard from our local jurisdictions, is the need to be able to budget for the grant right now. And so our goal is to get this information to our jurisdictions ASAP this month, to get the total amount, award amounts to them, or potential award amounts to them, as well as the eligible uses. And then really to host a walkthrough grant application meeting for folks in May and open our grant in June. That does mean that we'll be coming to you all as a committee, ideally next month, for final input on this, so that we can walk this policy proposal all the way up through our process, to get the full board approval prior to June, so that we can open the grant in June. But the goal then would be to keep the grant open through the end of August, and to ideally have all of our contracting done with our jurisdictions by September, October of this year. There's more I can share a little bit on that later. I do want to respect Mac's time, so I will stop sharing now. But if you have any questions, please do feel free to reach out to me directly at my email, and I'd be happy to set up a call to discuss anything or respond to your questions electronically as possible. Thanks, folks.
Okay, now we're ready for agenda item number 6. Thank you so much, Greg.
Thanks, Greg. Thank you, Susie. I was ready to go, so just pulling up my screen for folks. All right, hopefully you all can see this. Again, I'm Mac Prather, Program Manager for our Incentives, Energy Advising, and Low Income Full Service programs. Very excited to share with you all that our RFP for our Incentive and Energy Advising Program vendor closed last night. So we are all sitting here anxiously awaiting those proposals and ready to dive into scoring. The real purpose of the presentation today is to kind of take a step back from where Greg was looking very much at the detailed design for his program. We're going to take a step back and look at kind of the context of what our staff and our vendors are going to be diving into in the next several months as we design these incentives in this program. So we, at the end of the meeting, want to give kind of a level playing field for everyone to ask questions. We want you to understand what staff is working on a little bit more and have that context. And Susie, if it's okay, I would like to invite folks just to ask questions and offer their own experience as we're going through this presentation, because it's really conversational. I'll also kind of humble myself and say, I think a lot of you have very deep expertise in some of the things we'll be talking about and just scratching the surface. So I would actually really appreciate it if you would ask those questions and speak from your own experience and add to the conversation as we go. That helps us know your interest, know your expertise, and know where you might want to plug in as we're diving into this program design. So today we are going to get to those outcomes by talking through a little bit of building science. You heard at our last meeting, we talked about that whole building approach that we want to point to with these programs, and we're going to touch on kind of what that means and why that's important. We're going to give a real example, a real life DRCOG employee who installed a heat pump, and help you kind of step into that person's shoes and understand their experience with getting this equipment installed and utilizing incentives. And we're going to just kind of go over some of the additional considerations that we're going to be working through for this incentive program and see where there's interest. So this is one I think we have some good, very deep expertise on the committee, but you heard us in our last meeting talk about this whole building approach, the building science approach. And we want to make sure everyone kind of understands what we mean when we say that and why it's important. If you're building a new building or if you're working on an existing building, it's really important to think about managing many things, but particular to that building science approach, we want to be thinking about managing the water, air, moisture in the building, and heat. So all of those things are really important to the comfort, the health of the person living in the building, the durability and resilience of the building, and energy efficiency. So, we manage these things. If you think about gutters on a building as a way to move water away from the foundation and away from your siding to keep the water from intruding. Fans in your bathroom are a way that we manage air in a home. And that's also a way to manage moisture, to get that moist air from your shower out of the building so that mold doesn't develop. And heat, of course, if you have a furnace, you're generating heat in a building to keep you warm, or if you have an air conditioner, you're moving heat out of the building. For the heat pumps that we're really emphasizing with this program, you're going to hear us talk a lot about air and heat, especially. That heat pump, if you remember, is moving heat inside or out of the building. And in some cases, moving air through ducts, circulating air through rooms to get that heat moving around. And if you remember back to Physics 101, we know that things tend to move from high concentrations to low concentrations. So water wants to go where it's not supposed to go. It wants to go from the wet place to the dry place, from your shower into the wall. High pressure wants to move to low, and so forth. And so as we're thinking about kind of the effect on the building of any project, we want to emphasize how we're managing all these conditions. And the heat pump, I guess the point is to start thinking about the heat pump not just as a measure that we're incentivizing, but part of a whole building and part of a whole home, something that's affected by the other parts of the building and the home, and that has an effect on them. Also, thinking back to our first meeting, we said energy efficiency is the first fuel. So you remember our North Star for this program really is to reduce energy use and reduce pollution. And one way we can affect that is to make houses and buildings more efficient. Here in the illustration, you'll see on the left an energy inefficient home where cold air is seeping into the building and hot air is leaking out. And on the right, a highly energy efficient home that's very tight envelope. So what does this have to do with our incentive program? We really want to be promoting this whole building approach as we're promoting the cold climate heat pump technology. So the research tells us that not only the blanket and the insulation you put on the home matters, but a very tight envelope, like we see on the right of this slide, actually helps heat pumps perform to their full potential. In order to get that most efficient performance, we want a building that's tight and air is not leaking out of the envelope. So it's important for us as we're working on the design of these incentives to think about ways to emphasize that and to emphasize ways to insulate buildings. If you have a building which is more insulated and has a better envelope, it takes less heat to keep it comfortable. And that means that we can install smaller equipment and save people more money in the long term. So it's important for our staff as we're designing these programs. And it's also part of kind of the approach we want to promote to the contractors that we're working with and training. Folks like Mountain West Heat Pumps, Sean and PowerCom, who are part of this group, I think are really leaders in that contractor space. They're working together with other trades, working together with air sealing and insulating contractors, and really focusing on the whole building and the occupant. And that's something that we want to promote through this program. This, I just put this slide in here because I think this is such a cool example of a envelope improvement for a building. You're seeing a duplex side-by-side dwelling where the right half has been insulated and weatherized. Looks like probably some window replacements were done there. And this is a visual that shows you just how much heat was escaping before those measures were done. So all of that, heat loss is energy loss, is extra pollution. So the purpose is to kind of keep us thinking about the big picture here in the full building. We're going to dive into this real world example from an actual DRCOG employee. We'll call her, she has provided all this information anonymously, so we'll call her Mrs. Cog. But this person I talked to a month or two ago, they were just starting to think about a project in their home. And they knew that their furnace was starting to get older, still working fine. It was probably about 10 years old, but they were thinking about, what to do at the end of life of that equipment. And they also didn't have air conditioning in the home. So that was really a big driver for making an upgrade to add that cooling and add that resilience measure to their home. Thinking about the motivations of this person and their family, probably first was comfort. So were they thinking about the energy efficiency and the climate and environmental impact first? Probably not. They were thinking about how can my family be safer and more comfortable in the summer. Second, they were thinking about value. How do I get this project done in a way that's affordable for my family and get the best value, the highest efficiency equipment, and something that's going to last for the long term. And then when I talked to them, it was clear that they were also interested in making a choice that had an environmental impact, something that was good for the planet and would be good for their health and for their children. So I think always focusing on those motivations is important. This is just to help you kind of get in the mindset of this person planning the project and appreciate that, we're all thinking about this environmental impact, but that's not always the first decision maker for somebody really going through this. They got, I think, 4 quotes from different contractors. They happen to be in City and County of Denver, and Xcel Energy is their both gas and electric provider. And the project they decided to go with was a new cold climate ductless heat pump. And this is an actual photo of the heat pump that was installed just about a month ago. On this page, you're seeing the actual quote that this person got from their installer. And I appreciate that it's very small and maybe hard to read. And I think that that's also kind of the point of showing this to you all, that if you are not an expert and you don't really know the different model numbers of a Mitsubishi system, you don't know all the incentives that's available, this is a lot of information to digest. And multiply this by 3 or 4 or 5 installers that you might be working with. That's a lot of work that this homeowner is going through to plan the project. Just to highlight for you all, on the right side of the page, we're seeing some of the state, local, and utility incentives. So you see Xcel Energy, Denver Climate Action Rebate, and a federal tax credit all show up. This installer is also offering their own financing to help make this project a little bit more palatable for the homeowner. But this means that the homeowner had to check all of these incentives were adding up, that they were maximizing value, and kind of had to do it on their own. So just, kind of grounding us again in this real life example and reflecting that this is something that we're trying to really help the homeowner navigate through this energy advising provider. We want to provide that service and consolidate these incentives into something that's a lot easier to understand and navigate and point to this better equipment. The takeaway from our colleague here, when I talked to them at the end of the project, she said it was complicated. That's a direct quote, and that's from a kind of description of the whole project, soup to nuts. To get those quotes to make the comparison for her, for someone very motivated with the resources to do it, it was complicated. And again, that just highlights that what we're trying to do with this incentive program and with the energy advising is to remove that complexity for both the homeowner and the contractor. that's just one example. This person happened to be, like I said, in Denver and Excel territory, which means that they had pretty high and pretty significant incentives available to them for this cold climate heat pump. Through this program, we're going to be serving a much broader region and a diverse region with many utilities, many different towns and counties and jurisdictions. And the existing situation differs pretty drastically across the whole region right now. So this is current state. Well, I'm sorry, this is the status as of when these slides were put together, when the analysis was done at the end of February. So some of these have changed a little bit since then, but you'll see over on the left, we're looking at the total incentive amount available to a customer installing a cold climate heat pump. And the percentage on that bar graph below that is the percent of differential cost covered. So, you know, instead of installing a standard furnace and air conditioner pair, there's a differential cost associated with installing a more efficient and better cold climate heat pump. So this graph is attempting to show how much of that differential cost is covered through incentives at the utility, local, state, and federal level through tax credits. Some of the areas in the DRCOG region have quite high incentives right now. Xcel Energy has tripled theirs in the past 6 months. So we're seeing kind of this landscape where there's very high incentives in some areas of the DRCOG region. And in other areas, you know, in this graph, we're highlighting Bennett, but there are some areas in the region and the state that only have this $500 state tax credit and the $2,000 federal tax credit available as incentives. So on one hand, the example project, this person was lucky to live in an area and install a project at a time when there were very lucrative incentives. But this is something that we're really going to have to think carefully about as we design an incentive program that's meant to transform the market across the whole region. This is something that I anticipate coming back to this group with for your input and with some recommendations. If you remember that first presentation, we talked about how important it is to have consistency and similar processes and amounts across the whole service area of one contractor. So we want to make sure that in order to transform that market, we're giving a consistent offering across the board. There's, I think, a number of ways we can do that, but it just goes to show that that's going to be a very important decision point for this group and for this program to make sure that we can be offering that kind of equitably through the whole region. Was there a question? No? Okay.
Mac,
Yeah,
I'm
Mac.
curious.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mark.
Okay. Question I have is this. I mean, this is very, very informative and I appreciate it, but from the perspective of a homeowner, everyone's going to have a unique situation in regard to their existing equipment, furnace, air conditioner. And, you know, let's say one is, you know, say 8 years old and the other one's, you know, just installed a year ago. How can one determine whether it makes sense and when it makes sense to make these improvements? Because especially if you've just done something recently, I think you know, it's going to be in good shape for a long time, presumably, and probably considerably more efficient than what it replaced. So I think, you know, from having a tool by which a homeowner can utilize to help make that decision may be particularly useful, because this isn't the sort of thing that a regular homeowner thinks about on a regular basis.
Yep, that's exactly right. Or maybe ever until your
Right.
water heater fails, right? No, I think it's an excellent question. The energy advisor service that we will have that's really molded and modeled off of Boulder County's service, I think will really be the the help for homeowners in planning these projects. So I tend to think of that, Martin, like maybe a decision tree, a way to kind of guide that discussion when you know the motivations of the customer, right? So somebody who's highly motivated by that environmental impact might make a different decision than somebody who is highly motivated by what they can afford, right? And having that kind of decision tree and one-on-one advice is something that energy advisor service will offer. I also hope that some of the research and that literature review that we're talking about with Greg will also inform that. We know that there's some great research and great examples out there already. And if there's any novel kind of research that we need to look at for the region to help us think about, what's the lowest hanging fruit, and based on your building type, maybe what's the best kind of combination of measures to look at. I think that's something that we're talking through internally that would then inform that decision tree in that conversation. But is that responsive to the question?
Very helpful. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, and tagging onto that, with respect to those incentives, and like you said, where we're spending our resources, I believe some type of guide, like you said, around where those resources are being allocated, like you said, in a new installation versus an old installation, and just how, I guess, again, how we're allocating our resources, not only in the area of the install, but also in the area of the marketing and the approach and the whole 9 yards in terms of how we're attacking the community in whole. But I did want to go back to the incentives and the approach here. So are you saying that the DRCOG approach is to kind of level those incentives going across each of the counties in terms of its own incentive program? And is that the gist of it? And then my second question is, how are you looking at potentially allocating those resources when you look at some of the regions or some of the areas in which the incentive programs are being taken away, like for instance, like you said, in the city of Denver and some of these other areas? How are we kind of balancing those overall incentives? Or I guess what's the approach?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Steve. That's I will first say that we don't have that full proposal today because we're just getting the responses from the vendors who are going to implement this program. So these are exactly the kind of questions that we will want to dig into with this group and bring the proposal to. In general, I think kind of just talking about our motivation, our objectives, we're really pushing for that market transformation, trying to get contractors the new skills to do cold climate heat pumps, to do more of a whole building approach. And so to me, that necessitates consistency across the region, right?
Gotcha.
There are a lot of ways that through the design of the program we can get to that, but I think that's the goal, is to make it easier for the contractor to navigate the projects regionally, if that answers the
Yeah.
question. It's not meant to be a
Okay.
non-answer. Those are exactly the things we're diving into. So,
Okay. Thank you.
Sean, did you
Hey,
I
Mac.
saw your hand up?
Yeah, just to add on to that, with the expected reduction from Excel and the realized reduction from City of Denver, and there's a lot of sort of this uncertainty in the market right now, which uncertainty is one of the most challenging things you can add on to a small business when they expect these programs to be in place. So perhaps, and this is just an ask, perhaps we could look at a negotiation or timeline coordination between Excel and DRCOG and Denver to look at smoothing out. It doesn't have to be the same amount of rebates applied, but if we can have effectively some bridge incentives or something along those lines. So if Excel has to pull back in June and DRCOG isn't expected to release until, say, October not sure exactly what, but, and then looking at the funding that was pivoted within the city of Denver. If contractors, salespeople, homeowners, etc., can say, okay, there is a change coming. I'm okay with the change, but make it one change instead of off again, on again, maybe so, maybe not. And that confusion really throws people for, for a wild ride that they don't want.
Yep, understood. That is the goal, is to minimize the market confusion and the uncertainty. And that's I think you hit the nail on the head. That risk from the small business, from the contractor, means hesitation and means we're not moving in the right direction. So fully agree. We are still meeting with Xcel Energy folks about weekly, and I continue to hear that they believe they have incentive to last at least through the end of 2025. I hope we're going to hear if that's changing or accelerating so that we can try and balance that, like you're saying. And you mentioned also Denver. I think, the original hope was that we would be able to push DRCOG's program really quickly, September, October timeframe, and pick up kind of smoothly where Denver and Boulder incentives have left off. But that increased interest in Denver meant that they were used up a little quicker than we hoped. So we will have a gap, but I think the intent of the design and the intent of the whole program is really to do something that's going to not turn on and off. It's going to give us that stability. And so that's, as we select this vendor and as we bring a little bit more of the detailed design to you all, that's what we want to be keeping in mind. So. And Sean, I think you have great experience to bring to this group too, from your work, obviously.
Look forward to it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all for the good conversation. I think we've already touched on some of these other market barriers, and the questions that are coming up are really critical to what we're trying to address. So I've just highlighted a few other things here that we will be digging into that we want you to be aware of. The first, Sean was touching on that a little bit, but the acceptance of this program by the folks that are installing equipment is really the number one consideration. We, again, have to be building a program that works for those small businesses and works and gives us consistency across the region and minimizes the administrative burden. So I think that balance that kind of Sean was alluding to, the balance of incentive amounts that motivate purchases versus keeping those incentives available for longer and to more customers is really challenging. Two, we're also thinking about system failures. So again, we want to point towards replacement before the end of system life. But we know that, Martin, as you said, people tend, in their homes at least, to not think about these projects until something goes wrong. So that, through our marketing and community outreach, is something that we want to be working on as well. I'll jump down to the spark gap. If you're not aware of that term, that just kind of describes that cost difference between that traditional wheezy gas furnace and the highly efficient cold climate heat pump. There's a spark gap when the contractor goes to the distributor to purchase that equipment and then sells it to the customer. And there's also a spark gap running the equipment in some cases. So the cost of operating that heat pump can differ from your old traditional furnace. All things we have to be thinking about, not only in program design, but also in how we market and communicate and inform customers through energy advising. And finally on this list, AC substitution. This is one to think about the best options for replacing old air conditioners. So going back to that decision tree, how do we make sure someone has a replacement for their existing system that works in their home, that's getting the most efficiency and is designed correctly. And one challenging one to think about is replacing old air conditioners. It's going to take some new skills from our installers and designers. Also want to describe really the value chain of getting these projects done. Obviously, the equipment is manufactured in one place. It's stored and shipped from the distributor, where it's purchased by a contractor who then ultimately sells it to the customer. And something we are hoping to see and very interested in from our vendors who will be implementing this program is the ability to put that incentive into the market at different locations on this value chain. So if you're familiar with Xcel Energy's program, that's an incentive that reaches the customer. That's the example we gave earlier today. The customer fills out paperwork and gets a rebate. So that's down at the customer end of the value chain. But there are also some really great examples, especially on the East Coast, of incentives that are directed towards distributors to help them stock new equipment, to help them market that to the contractors they work with. So that's something that we're interested in and really looking at long-term for that market transformation approach. I see some nodding heads, so I think some folks are familiar with those models, which is great. On the sales and then on the customer side, we talked about that spark gap. And so in order to design both an energy advising service and an incentive that helps people choose the right equipment, we're thinking about the first costs, so the cost of purchasing this system and signing the contract. The differential cost, you heard me say earlier, but that's the comparison between that kind of code minimum equipment and the higher efficiency heat pump option. And finally, operational costs. So how is this going to impact your bills if you're changing from a furnace to a new cold climate heat pump, or an old air conditioner to a new efficient heat pump air conditioner? All things that we need to be informing customers and bringing into the design of these incentives. Really just trying to give language as we start to bring some of these recommendations to you all in the coming months. The fourth bullet that just appeared there is also maintenance costs. So that's important for incentives, but especially important for our low income customers, making sure that folks are prepared for ongoing costs and have those maintenance costs covered to get the most and the highest efficiency and the longest life out of all of these projects. Sean mentioned a few of these already, but we're of course trying to address contractor risks, and one that continues to come up in feedback we hear is the risk of floating the incentive. In other words, if a contractor is required to give a discount to a customer and reduce the cost of their quote, how long do they have to wait to be made whole again? So we'll be looking at some creative ways to address that and hopefully eliminate that risk and concern. The customer risk, is really about confidence and getting the right information. So those are the type of things that we're hoping to address by creating one consistent program and one energy advisor service. And with that, I will wrap. I'd love, again, to hear some reactions, some interest from folks. Again, really meant to just prepare you all for kind of the coming details and recommendations, so we all share some language. But if you're interested in anything that was mentioned here, you can always reach out to me via email. We can chat one-on-one.
Mac, just to set in on a meeting a month or two ago, and with the City of Denver's planning department. And I think a key consideration here is, how do we optimize? Yes, certainly load calculations and dropping the heating and cooling loads of the buildings and optimizing the building, but also sort of optimizing our scope of work is, I think, a significant overlooked opportunity. How do we, how do we get there faster, easier, better, or more just sort of, do we have to follow all the rules or do we understand how to logically, legally bend the rules or table something for now and go back at it? And I find that, measuring and verifying is a great way to do that and not just making assumptions on because it's written down somewhere, we have to do it this way.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, I will just add that I think through the contractor navigation hubs that Clay is leading and through some of that support, jurisdictional support that Greg is leading, there are also those opportunities to think about, optimizing how projects get done, not just for incentives, but whole planning, if that's what you're thinking.
So real quick on that, Max. So when is the plan to kind of review these RFPs
Yeah,
and
oh,
kind
sorry.
of some of the programming?
Yes, so we just received responses to that closed RFP today. Internally within DRCOG, that'll be reviewed, scored, recommendation to select a vendor will go to the board, and then we'll dive into more of the detailed program design with the goal of launching kind of the first tranche of incentives at the end of the third quarter, start of the fourth quarter, so around October. That means we'll have to come to this group in between that board decision and the launch of the first incentives. I don't believe we have it confirmed yet for a meeting, but it should be late summer that we'll be coming back to you all with a lot more detail on this and some recommendations.
Awesome. Thanks.
Martin, I saw your hand go up as well.
Yeah, thank you. Kind of linking this back to our previous conversation about, jurisdictional improvements. Can you make some comments in regard to the general level of readiness for local building departments to evaluate, permit, and inspect heat pumps?
Yeah, thanks, Martin. I probably cannot. I have pretty limited experience with those groups across the region. I know Greg has been doing more outreach with those folks, so I'll invite Greg to respond as well, maybe Clay. I will say, Martin, one thing we've asked that our incentive vendor needs to bring to the table is the ability to do quality installation verification, which for a heat pump means validating that the design is right and it's selected properly and that it's commissioned and installed properly in a safe way that's going to maximize efficiency. So that is something that that our vendor must do as part of their program. I don't know if we necessarily see that as supplementing or taking the place of that quality assurance and quality control that ultimately the jurisdiction owns, but it is something that we're building in for our own quality control of the program, right? And we hope that there's some opportunity to do training and share those best practices from the vendors and from our own program. Greg, I don't know if you want to add to that.
I can't speak, Martin, to the overall readiness at the jurisdictional level to do that quality assurance, but I do know that one of the spaces that we're trying to make sure that we create within the peer network is a space for essentially buildings officials to meet and discuss, best practice on quality assurance. And I think, as Max said, there's a feedback loop here between all of our programs to make sure that, there's a space for all of the buildings folks to be talking. There's a space for us to get that information back to Clay and all the, the workforce development folks, as well as to Mac and the, administration of his RFP.
That's helpful. Thank you.
And Martin, I can just a little bit add in terms of what's going on in the field now. And absolutely, the inspectors are not kind of performing those tasks. They're inundated. So, you know, most of our installs, we're just having to get inspectors through some of the basic kind of fundamental checks, but not to the level that you're talking about as they are discussing in terms of the quality control you're talking about putting into your vendors. But I absolutely agree that it has to happen at that level. I would not look to the inspector level to be able to perform those types of tasks just because of they're already inundated, and the newer technologies and getting inspectors up to board would be pretty tough in my opinion. But
That's very helpful information. Thank you.
yeah. In my last question on this, Mac, with you and Greg on board here, how much coordination do you see going on between the incentives and kind of, you know, the regulations around, like you said, you know, the types of installs, or what the parameters that are going around those installs? Has there been any thought in terms of linking the incentives to try to drive, you know, trying to drive the install and trying to drive some of those other things that we talked about before? You talked about the outside, you talked about the perimeter, you talked about weatherization. There's, you know, it's going to be very difficult to kind of get that whole approach, but I do see an opportunity to maybe get there with packaging some of those parameters into the incentive program. Has there been any discussion around that?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. There has been a little bit of discussion first about the kind of permitting inspection that we already talked about with Martin. There's a feedback opportunity there. I think there's also potentially a good opportunity for those kind of middle-sized commercial buildings that you know, may or may not be covered by different performance policies, state or kind of Denver's policy. And we've talked about the Energy Advisor Service as one place that could potentially be a resource for those commercial building owners and their teams to navigate those programs and start making the links to, you know, incentives. I think also the contractor support piece that Clay is running is a really important piece of that as well. So we will have those contractor navigation agents who can hopefully help interpret and kind of consolidate all of the different guidance across the region and help contractors kind of more effectively engage with those permitting offices and the right people. So beyond that, again, Greg, if you want to add to that, but it's a great suggestion. I think we're starting to look at those linkages and would love to explore it more.
Yeah, I'll just quickly hop in, Mac, to say that, Steve, I don't know that we've had conversations about structuring the incentives program to sort of drive policy adoption or implementation. But we know that there's a lot of activity that's going to be going on in all of your jurisdictions from all of our programs. And I think it's very important that we do, and we have talked about the importance of making sure that as local jurisdictions are considering, you know, what policies they're going to be pursuing and how they're pursuing them, that they're all equipped with the knowledge of everything else that's happening, so that, you know, when you're hosting a meeting about, you know, policy, you can also say, hey, and this isn't just a regulatory thing. We're not just coming in telling you you have to do this. We have opportunities here for you. We have incentives available for you. We can help facilitate your connection to the incentives program or to the low income, the income qualified, rehab program, or to, so we can make those connections, and we want to make sure that we're really utilizing the peer network and all of the communication that we're going to be having with all of your staff on a regular and consistent basis moving forward as an opportunity to make sure that, you're equipped to sell, right? Like this opportunity. This is not just a regulatory thing. There's a lot of opportunity that Mac's really going to be offering for your communities.
Yeah, and that's what I was really thinking about, which is, you've got the stick and the carrot approach, and you can integrate that approach around here. Over here, I have the stick. Over here, I'm going to use the carrot, and just take that kind of, broader approach in terms of linking those two, in terms of getting to your overall outcome. Because there's only so much stuff you're going to do with your stick. There's only so much stuff you can do with your carrot. So that's what I was just thinking.
All right, Susie had to drop off, so I'm gonna close this thing out. We do have the opportunity for any other member comments. Hearing none. Our next meeting is scheduled for, just lost it, where'd that go? May 6th, that one will be virtual as well. That's going to be where we bring the policy that Greg described to you for a full recommendation to the oversight committee, so that we're hoping that we can get this policy adopted in May and then really begin launching that and getting the money out the door for those jurisdictions as soon as possible. So with that, we are adjourned. Thank you so much for your time today.